Dave Thomas, and today I'm going to be building the LOC1 Xeno by LOC Precision. And the LOC1 series are downscales of some of LOC Precision's high power rockets. And so this is actually a really good beginner's kit. It gives you the basics of all aspects of model rocketry building. And one of the things I really like this is it has through-the-wall fins, which makes it a whole lot stronger than a typical butt-jointed rocket, say like the Estes Alpha, which is similar in shape. Now, one of the things that's a little bit different with these kits is that LOC does not supply printed instruction with them. Instead, they give you a QR code here and a website, and so you can go to their website and download the instructions for the particular kit you have. I downloaded the instructions from LOC Precision's website, and basically it's 2 pages here, and the first page is mostly safety code and the rocket itself, and so the instructions here are on the second page, and these are fairly generic for all their LOC1 kits. And they don't actually have a parts list, so we'll just have to go through here and kind of compare to the instructions to make sure we have everything. Alright, so we've got the body tube, motor mount was hiding inside of it. Okay, the nose cone here, small parts bag with fins and engine centering rings and engine block ring and engine clip and the launch lug. Streamer and Kevlar shot cord, and the other piece of cloth in there, that is a reusable wadding basically. It's a Nomex protector. And then we have the decal sheet. So that's pretty much it. So they're going to have us measure 1/4 inch on the motor mount tube. Okay, or about 6 millimeters if you are metrically inclined. So I'm going to measure 6 millimeters here because I am metrically inclined. Okay, and then we're going to just cut a notch at that point, and this will be for the motor retainer clip. So about a 3 millimeter or 1/8 of an inch notch, and then we'll have to open up this other bag. Okay, and grab the retainer clip. And so the upper part of the clip will just pop into our slot there. Okay, so it should look just like this. Alright, next we're going to add the centering rings. And I'm just going to dry fit this first. So they're putting one up here right at the head of the engine clip, and another one pretty far back here. Okay, and what we want to do is compare these. When the motor mount is installed, it should be flush. Okay, but we've got to be careful that we don't get a centering ring blocking the fin slots here. So I'm just going to dry fit this in. Okay, so that is flush with the motor. Actually, it's a little bit too far. Motor mount's flush there, and you can just see the very edge of the centering ring. So I'm going to back this off just a little bit. Okay, and if we needed to, we could move this one aft as well. And I'll tell you the reason we might want to do that here in just a moment. Okay, so if you do it like this, this is how they've got it. The only disadvantage to this configuration is it's really hard to move this out of the way far enough to change the motor. And that's because this ring has to be so far back. So an alternative, if we measure this here, what I'm going to do is move this forward centering ring back a bit. Okay, Okay, so that when the motor mount is installed, it will not impinge upon the forward end of our slot. And then what I'm going to do is take this ring and I'm going to cut a notch in it. Okay, and the notch is going to be as wide as the motor retainer clip. So about 1/8 of an inch or about 3 millimeters here. And I'm going to cut this down all the way, almost all the way through. I'm going to leave just a little bit of paper on the outside just to keep the ring intact. Okay, but you can see here then the gives us a little space. Again, be careful you don't slip and cut your fingers doing this. And if you do happen to cut all the way through the ring, it's not the end of the world. It will still work. Alright, so there I've got a notch in it. And now that notch is going to fit over the engine retainer, but it allows it to travel a little farther. So that now when this goes in, okay, I've got a little bit more play there to allow me to move that out. And in fact, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and cut this all the way out. You don't have to, it just depends on how much room you want in there. But I would like to have more room to get the engine out. So I've got another one of these kits. I've got the LOC1 High-Tech, and the one thing that bothers me about it is it's really hard to change the motor out. Okay, so if you put in a split ring like that, when it gets glued in, it gives even more travel there, okay, which is going to make it easier to change the motor out once everything is put in place. Okay, and then the thrust ring here, the smaller ring, this is going to be glued just right there on the top. Okay. Now, the other thing this has that you don't find on, say, Estes kits and a lot of others is a Kevlar shock cord. Kevlar has the advantage of being very strong and very light and very fire resistant, but it has no stretchiness whatsoever, and so you have to have a fairly long one. Okay. General rule of thumb is at least 3 times the length of the rocket. This is even longer than that, so this is great. And usually Kevlar shock cords are mounted to the motor mount. Okay, and so in their instructions here, they're going to go ahead and glue on all the rings first and then put on the shock cord. And so we will follow that. Okay, and I'm just going to go through here and dry fit this once more. So I make sure that I don't have a problem with my fins later on. Okay, so I have clearance on the fin slots. So here I'm just going to make a little mark for myself, so I know where that forward ring is. Okay, and I'm going to back it up a little bit and apply a ring of glue there. Just a quick bead. It's actually way more than you need. Alright, and I'm going to smooth that around. It's so I don't need that much glue. And on this ring, it doesn't matter if you get it on the engine hook or not. It won't make any difference. All right, and now I'm going to push this forward again until I reach that mark that I made there. Okay, for the aft ring, since I've got this glue all over my finger, I'm going to go ahead and just apply this to the inside of the ring. Okay, and then I'm going to put that back on there and give it just a little bit of clearance there. Okay, and then make sure to wipe out any glue that got inside there. Okay, and making sure that I don't have any glue on the outside of the rings, I'm going to give this one more quick test fit to make sure I'm not blocking any of my slots, and I'm not. Okay, so I'm going to pull this back out. Okay, and I'm going to put a little pressure there. You can even put a little piece of tape on that if you need to. I went ahead and put a piece of masking tape on the split ring there. And now I'm going to do the thrust ring here. And for this, I'm just going to apply some glue to the ring itself rather than to the inside of the motor mount tube. And the only reason for that is to help keep glue from getting pushed down inside where the motor is going to be. So in this case, the excess glue will get pushed up toward the forward end of the motor mount where it won't make any difference. Okay, so now I'm just going to put this in here, and it's going to rest against the forward end of the engine hook. And that's going to cause it to try and tilt downwards, so you want to avoid that. And then the excess glue here we can just smear around the top. Okay, and let that dry again. While the glue is drying on the motor mount, let's talk about the fins for a bit here. These are made of basswood, which is a little bit harder and a little bit denser than balsa, which makes them a lot stronger. And it also means they don't have as deep of a grain, so you don't have to use as much sanding sealer on these. And in fact, you can go without it and just put some heavy coats of primer on there if you want to go that route. As far as shaping the fins, at the very least we're going to want to remove the soot from the laser cutting process. So for that, I'm just going to use some 100 grit sandpaper, and just you can pile these all into one group like this, and then just sand each edge a few times. Okay, until you've removed most or all of that soot. Now you don't want to sand too far, especially on these fin tabs, so that they will still reach through appropriately and bind to the motor mount where they're supposed to go. Okay, and then I'm just going to turn this around and do the leading edges. Okay, and then get the tip edge and the trailing edge. Alright, and then if you need to, you can go back and finish off each edge if it needs some more. The little bits of the root edges here, you may just have to take a little piece of sandpaper and do this. It actually works really well. Okay. And then go ahead and do a brief sanding across the surface here. And for this you'll want a little bit finer sandpaper, either 150 or 220 grit. And just sand across here a few times, because there are also some scorch marks here you may want to remove. Okay, that one's got some really bad scorch marks. Now to sand the fin surfaces, I like to have a sanding tee or a sanding block so that I put uniform pressure across it. And here I'm just going to sand with the wood grain. And you see it doesn't take much. So just a few strokes along there. Alright, and if you want, you can keep going to get rid of those scorch marks completely. Otherwise, primer will hide it. Okay, and then just turn them over and do the same thing. And then if you want, you can continue with some finer sandpaper. I am going to use a little bit of sanding sealer on this, so I'll wait on the fine sanding until I get done with that. And I'm going to go ahead and sand these other two off camera. I have the surfaces of all three fins sanded now. And the next thing I'm going to do is round off or taper the leading edge here. If you want, you can put a full taper across from the leading edge to the trailing edge. Taper the tip edge if you want. I'm just going to do the leading edge because there is the trade-off that the finer you get these edges, the more likely they are to be damaged. Okay, so that's got a nice leading edge taper, and I'll just repeat this with the other two fins off camera. At this point I have the leading edges of all my fins tapered, and now what I'm going to do is seal them. I'm going to use some water-based wood filler here, and these go by several different brand names. They're all pretty much the same. So they come in a tub or in a tube as a paste. And you may have seen on other videos where you can thin this with water and apply it. And I've actually used that on a few of my own videos as well. This time though, I've been doing a little bit of experimentation, and I found that rubbing alcohol actually makes a really good thinner as well, and it dries faster. So I'm just going to take a small amount of this into a cup. And now I'm just going to add some rubbing alcohol, 70% isopropanol, and I'll start with about a half of the volume that I have of the paste there. And now I'm just going to mix this together. And the advantage of using the rubbing alcohol is that it dries faster. And one thing you can run into if you're using this method is it may start drying up in your cup before you're ready. And in that case, you can simply add a little bit more alcohol to it. Okay, so that's about the consistency of latex paint there. You might want it a little thicker. I've still got some lumps in here, so we'll see how it comes out. Alright, and then I'm just going to lay these down when I'm done on some foil. Now, when you do this with balsa fins, you can stick pins into them. The basswood is not as amenable to that. Okay, but now you just smear this on. I'm going to try to avoid the fin tabs just so that I want them rough so that they have a greater gripping surface for the glue. So I'm going to let these dry for at least an hour, 30 minutes on each side, and then come back and sand those off. So this is how the fins look after they've dried. And now all we need to do is give them another sanding. I'm going to use 150 grit sandpaper here, and we're going to create a lot of dust, so just keep that in mind. Alright, and we want to keep sanding just until we can see the top of the grain of the wood there. So these are almost to that point. You may also want to change to a finer grit sandpaper as you get closer to the grain. So I could go to a 220 grit here and just finish sanding that. Okay, and then just make sure to sand the edges again. And especially the root edges here, because those are going to have glue on them. So we want to have those nice and clear. Alright. Now if you do end up with just a little bit of a bow to them, you can either place these under a heavy object like a really thick book for about a day. If it's not really bad, generally you can just go ahead and mount it, and then it will straighten out on its own. Okay, so I am going to do the other two fins off camera. My fins are all sanded and smooth here, and now I'm just going to set these aside for a bit. We'll come back to those. But next we need to attach the shock cord. And so this is different from Estes type rockets in that it actually comes with a Nomex, not Nomex, but a Kevlar shock cord. And usually with Kevlar cords we tie them to the motor mount rather than using a glued on type of shock cord mount. Alright, so here's my Kevlar. It's a little bit frayed on the ends here, and so something you can do to make this easier to work with is just apply a little dab of super glue right below the frayed area. I'm going to go ahead and do this on both ends. And that way it won't fray any further. Okay, and then you can just take a tissue here, wipe off the excess, and then you can either just let this dry for about 10 minutes on its own, or you can hit it with a little bit of accelerator, which most of them are just isopropyl alcohol. Okay, and that'll harden it almost immediately. Just make sure you've got someplace safe that you're squirting your isopropanol onto. Okay, and now what we're going to do is tie on the shock cord in between the centering rings here. Now what they're showing here is just a double knot tied into this. I'm going to do it a little bit differently, but either one will work. First I'm going to take and cut off the frayed area. There's still a little bit of super glue there, which is what I want. Okay, and the only thing I do a little bit differently, and you don't have to do this, is I like to tie a loop here in my Kevlar. So just an overhand fisherman's knot, sometimes called a water knot. Okay, and then I take the other end, put this through, and basically I'm making a large slip knot. Okay, and then I'm going to put that on here. Okay, and what's going to happen here is the shock cord then comes up over this centering ring. Okay, and then this will go up through the body tube and out to the recovery system. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to tack this in place, and I'm going to move this over to right here. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm actually taking advantage of the strength of the metal clip here. Okay, and I'm going to take some thick super glue. I'm not using this to do the main gluing. I just want to tack this into place here so my knot doesn't move. Okay, and then I can put just a drop of isopropanol on that to speed things up, and it'll evaporate quickly, so if you get any on the centering rings there, it'll come right back off again. Okay, and now I'm going to take my wood glue and I'm going to create a fillet around this. Now in larger rockets you may see that they'll have a notch here for the Kevlar to go through. This one, the Kevlar is thin enough that you really don't need to do it. It will fit easily between the centering ring and the body tube. Okay, I do want to make sure that that little free end there is staying down. If it gets in the way too much, you can simply cut it off. That one should be fine. Okay, so now I'm going to let this dry for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll insert it into the body tube. Now here again, the instructions are very minimal here, and really don't tell you ahead of time where to put the launch lug. But if you've built rockets before, typically the launch lug is going to go in between two of the fins, and usually forward of them. And so what you'll want to do here is take a pencil, and then using a door frame or a fin marking guide like this one, draw a line up the body tube. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is just find a point midway. You can usually just eyeball this. It's not going to be a big deal if you're off a little bit. And then I'm going to draw this line about 2/3 the way up the rocket. That way it gives me plenty of room for sighting. And I'll put my launch lug on here. And again, if you don't have one of these handy jigs here, you can do this in a door frame and do it against the edge. Okay. Now again, they're not telling us how far up to mount this. So I am just going to use my experience here and say I'm going to mount it at 8 centimeters, or about 3 inches. So going from the aft end of the rocket, okay, and this doesn't have to be really exact. I'm just going to make a little mark there. Okay, and the other thing you can do is take your launch lug here, okay, and go ahead and place it at that line, and then make a mark in front of it. And once you've got that, you can take some fine sandpaper, and anything from about 100 grit to 120 works here. And I'm just going to abrade the cardboard here along that line. If you sand away your line, that's fine. You can always draw it back in there if you need to. But what this does is it removes the glossy finish here, and this will allow the glue to adhere better. Okay, and then you can do the same thing to your launch lug. Just pick one edge or one side. You know, circles don't have sides, but you get the idea. And just roughen it up a little bit. And then when we go to glue this on, you'll get a tighter bond. I'm going to do the same thing around my fin slots. Alright, the fins will be attached to the motor mount directly, but will also be depending on fillets to help hold them in place, and so this gives a good grip for the fillets. And if you really want to take this to extremes, it's going to be really hard to tell where your fins are going to go on here, but what you can do is just roughen up the whole thing. And again, don't do this very deep. Okay. And if you don't do this, it's not a big deal. This is a small enough rocket that there's not going to be an extraordinary amount of force on the fins. The glue on my shock cord has set up enough that I can work with it. And now the first thing I'm going to do is just wrap these loops around my finger. So we want to get them out of the way. Okay, and then I'm going to simply place that inside the motor mount. And that'll keep everything nicely tucked away and keep the glue out of it. Now, one thing that may happen here, if you did the same thing I did here and moved this ring down, okay, which was not part of the instructions, you can just put the ring up here, is when we go to put the fins in, all right, the fin tabs might bonk up against this. If that happens, don't worry about it. All you have to do is just sand off the little bit of corner right here and they'll still fit fine. Okay, and we'll come back to that when we put the fins on. Now, for this step, I like to have a glue that gives me a little bit more working time. So most of my rocketry I do with this Loctite Express because it sets up really quickly and lets me move on to the next step. Okay, but putting this motor mount in to here, it's going to take us a little bit longer than just being able to just put it in, shove, and it's done. So I like to have a glue that gives me a longer working time. And here you can either use white glue, or you can use a wood glue that has a longer working time, like this Type Bond 3. So according to the instructions, what we're going to do is place glue in between the fin slots in here. Okay, and then the idea is we'll shove the centering ring through that glue as it passes inward. I'm going to use an applicator for this. And the first thing I'll do is just like they show, so I'm going to take my glue and just put a film in between the slots. Okay, and you want kind of a compromise here. So you want enough glue that gives you a good strong mount, but you don't want so much that it causes warpage of the body tube. And this can become especially noticeable if the tube shrinks a little bit with the glue and it causes a deformity of the fin slots. The other thing I'm going to do is place this up beyond, right beyond the fin slots, and just circle all the way around inside there, just beyond the slots. Okay, so here's where I want that higher working time. and orient this so that the engine clip is in line with your launch lug line. So now we're just going to pass this in. Okay, just got to work a little bit around that. And then before I slide this all the way in, I'm going to put a thin film on this aft centering ring. Okay, and then we're just going to slide that in all the way. And this is where having that longer working time glue helps. If you do this with a short working time glue, you may get it stuck halfway up before you finish all this. And then just make sure if you have any glue that got down in the motor mount that you just wipe that out. Okay, let this now set up for 15 to 30 minutes depending on your glue, and then we'll come back and put on the launch lug and the fins. Now, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go ahead and push the shock cord through, just in case I might have got some glue on the base as it passed through. So just take a pencil or a dowel here and just poke that back up through the body tube. Give it a shake there. Okay, and I'm just going to pull this taut so that if it got some glue on the base, that it won't stick to the side of the tube. And I'm pulling it across, so it's mounted over on this side, and I'm pulling it across the other side, keeping it taut. And now I'm just going to let this rest upright, and then gravity will just hold this in place. But that way the glue can finish drying without getting into or onto the shock cord and gluing it against the rocket. Now it's time to put the fins on. So bringing my fins back here and my rocket tube. And the first thing you want to do is just test fit these. So put them into the slots. Oh, well, what do you know? Okay, so the fin tabs on my fins are actually a little bit longer than the slots are. Okay, and they're very stiff going in there. Kind of loosens things up a little bit. Okay, but we do have the problem in that they are too long. And probably it's going to be best to take a little bit of wood off the front section there. Okay, so this is just a small hobby file, and I'm just going to take off a little bit at a time here. Okay, and make sure you don't start creeping inward as well, like it's trying to do there. Okay, so that gets us in. Alright, now earlier I mentioned that this corner here may bump up against the shock cord if you move the centering ring back the way I did in the video here. And so to get around that, now I'm just going to take and bevel off this corner on the front of the fin tab. There, and that gives us a better fit. Okay, now if you have a lot of space here, part of that is due to my filing. But you can see back here there's just a little gap there as well. You can either ignore that and just fill it in with the fillets, or very carefully take off a small amount of the entire root edge of the fin. Okay. So here I'm just going to give it a couple of strokes here across some 100 grit sandpaper. Okay, and that improves the fit just like that. And so I'm going to go ahead and go off camera and do the same thing for the other two fins. And as you do, go ahead and fit them into the same slot every time. So this fin is now going to be assigned to this slot because there may be slight imperfections and such where one fin needs shaped one way and another fin shaped a little bit differently. And this way you don't get your fins mixed up once you got them all perfectly shaped there. Here I have all of my fins dry fitted. So now I'm just going to get ready to glue them here. All right, and for this I'm going to go ahead and go back to my usual wood glue. And to start with, I'm just going to put a bead of glue along the root edge here. And also getting down not only on the fin tabs, but on the edges there at either end of the root edge. Okay, and then this is going to slip back inside here. Okay, and the excess glue that gets scraped up, just start that into a fillet. We'll put real fillets in later on. Okay, and then just look at the back here and make sure that the fins are perpendicular. They should be aligned with the tube. That's the nice thing about having pre-slotted tubes. Okay, let that wait 5 to 10 minutes and then you can go on and do the other two fins. So this one and this one. I'm going to do those off camera. The glue on my fins has dried, and so now I'm going to put the launch lug on. And so here again, we'll just look for the space there where I had sanded it. And just add a bead of glue to that. And then I'm going to stick that on the area of our line here where I had sanded that as well. Okay, and then just sight down the rocket and the line to make sure that the launch lug is straight. All right, and I'll let that dry, and when we come back we'll put fillets on all around the rocket. Now that the glue is dry on my launch lug and on the fins, I'm going to add fillets here. And we'll just use some more wood glue. You can use white glue as well. You'll want to have a few tissues or paper towels handy though, as this is going to get messy. So here I'm just going to run a bead of glue along the inside corner of the fins here. And I'll do this on a facing side, like this. Okay, and then you just take your finger and smooth that in. And you do the same thing here. And you can, if you got little blobs, you can just catch those right away. And I like to do one face at a time. So I'm going to put this up so that it can dry horizontally. And after that has dried for about 10 minutes, enough for it to set up, then I'll go on and do the next face and so on. I'm going to do those off camera as well as the fillet for the launch lug there. Something to be aware of in these generic instructions as we go from about this part here down to this part, it's talking about a payload section. Okay, and that's because these are generic instructions. This rocket does not have a payload section, so where we go from tying the shock cord onto an eyelet here, we will just tie it directly to the nose cone. My fillets are dry, And the next step is to complete the recovery system here. So I'll pull the shock cord back out. Now, if you're planning on painting the nose cone separately, you're going to want to wait on this step until after you paint your rocket. Okay, so open up the little package with the streamer in it here. This is a streamer protector or reusable wadding. It's made out of Nomex. And so your shock cord is just going to feed through that. Okay, and then the streamer also simply feeds through the shock cord here. Okay, and that's it. You don't have to tie anything except the nose cone. So when you are ready to put this together, simply pass the shock cord through the nose cone and then tie a double knot here. I'm not going to tie mine too tightly because I do want to paint the nose cone separately. Okay, but once you got it, go ahead and tighten that down, and I recommend putting a drop of super glue right on the knot and just let it soak in. That'll keep that knot from coming undone or unraveling. So that now when the rocket is ready for flight, I generally will move the streamer and the protector there all the way up, and then just fold up the streamer. So I'd like to make just several lengthwise folds to begin with. Just fold it upon itself, like that. Okay, and then roll up the final amount there. And then take the Nomex here and kind of cup it around. Alright. And then the remainder of the shock cord here, I'm just going to loosely coil. Place that down inside. Okay, and I'm going to take my streamer and its protector here. And the idea here is to kind of form a piston out of that protector. And just squish that down inside. Okay, and any remaining, just gently make sure, and you want to make sure that there's no part of the shock cord gets caught between the body tube and the shoulder here. Alright, so structurally, that's the rocket there. I'm going to prime and paint this, and so I'll come back at a few intermediate steps here, and we'll see how well I can make this thing look.